So here's the first question we're going to address today. What is the role of an attorney throughout the acquisition process? I guess people hadn't used attorneys before and had that question. Well, what do they do? Let's take a look at what they do and what they should do, in fact, and what they shouldn't do. So the first obligation that they have, or the first thing that they're going to do, is they're responsible for drafting and reviewing agreements. So whether it's your attorney as the buyer that's drafting the agreement with the seller attorney reviewing them, or vice versa, that's the first part of it. And what they'll end up doing is probably talking a lot to each other in legalese that gets the two attorneys to agree on the proper wording for different provisions of the document. And as long as your attorney is happy, you should be happy. And the same thing is true for the other side. That's their job, is to make sure that the agreement reflects in legal language what the intent of the seller and the buyer are. And so you're going to want to dialogue with your attorney so he understands, or she understands, your intent, and that they will also dialogue with you regarding the trade-offs between business risk and protection. Because your attorney can draw a 50 or 100-page document that protects you every way from Sunday, but that doesn't mean that the other party will sign it. It's too onerous to them. So there are certain risks that you end up assuming not being protected in your document, and the ability for you to assess the business risk to you is your job. That's not your attorney's job. It's your job, but it's your job to dialogue with your attorney to get them to where they can put into the legal language what needs to be there to protect you, but doesn't include what is not an appropriate business, what is an appropriate business risk for you to assume. Otherwise, you'll never get your document signed. So that's the process. And the third item here is to give you, as their client, legal advice and options. In other words, to tell you what's legally possible, what's not legally possible, how to accomplish something legally, what something might need to say to do it legally, what the options are, all of that, very viable conversation to have with your attorney. It's part of how they get the documents drafted correct. But here is the kicker for a lot of attorneys who think that they're somehow now experts on business. Their job is to absolutely abstain from giving you business advice. When it came to legal documentation, they went to school for several years to learn how to draft the documents, what the law says, what it has to say if it's going to protect you, the proper way to word the document. See, they've learned all that stuff. They're an expert in that. They were trained, and as long as they've been in practice doing this, they've now had experience, which they've learned from as well. But they didn't get the degree in business operation or business buying and selling. That's not what they got their degree in. Okay. They weren't trained for those things. They don't have any reason to have any more expertise in that than you do. And probably if you've been in business any length of time, you probably have more experience there in the operations and all of that than they do. So you cannot count on them, and you shouldn't rely on them. When you get in a bad position with the other party's attorney is when the other party is accepting business advice from their attorney who doesn't know anything. And it's problematic. Okay. So please keep these things in mind, because this is what their role really is. And if they're performing their role properly, they're staying in their lane, the lane that they've been trained for. The next question that we had, oh, and by the way, when you have questions on any of these, just write them down in that side panel. So at the end of the meeting today, we'll try and get to them, especially since we're going to be behind. I want to get in time. I want to get through all these. What is the CPA's role throughout the acquisition process? Okay. Their job is to review the company's books and records that you're going to buy and validate their efficacy. So they're the experts on financial documentation and books and records. That's what they've been trained to do. And you're going to rely on them to, as the experts, to review those books and records and to validate their efficacy. They're going to do, unless you curtail them from doing it, they'll also do for you what's called a search for hidden liabilities. In other words, there are tests that they can do on the financials of the information of the company that give clues to whether or not there are liabilities that the company has that have not been reported to you, or they're not reported on their financial statement. Very important, because you don't want to buy a company only to find out it owes money you didn't know it owed. They're also going to advise on the company's financial condition. They know by reading the financial statements whether that company is financially healthy, whether it's got too many liabilities for its assets, whether it has a ratio in their financial statement that shows that they're not really able to meet foreseeable debts coming up in the future. See, they know all that stuff. They've been trained in how to read all those financial relationships and ratios. And so they can advise you on all of that. They can help set up appropriate books and records accounting processes and controls post acquisition. Because maybe the company you're buying doesn't have the greatest books and records in the world. Maybe they don't have accounting processes in place that give the owner a true insight on a real time basis into the performance of the company. Maybe the owner doesn't have good controls because they just do everything. And so they don't worry about controls. But when you run the business, you're going to want to have hired people to do some of these things, and you don't want them running off with your money, right? So there have to be controls in there that make sure that doesn't happen. They can help you with all that. Okay. The one thing that they are not able to help you with is business advice. Accountants, frankly, are the worst business people on the planet. They are overly conservative, risk averse. They will not take risk for their own account and unlikely to in so they're unlikely to advise any business decision where they see any risk at all. So if you take your advice from them on business, you'll never do anything. You'll never make a profit. You'll never have a business that grows. You'll never have any of those things because they won't permit the risk or advise something positive when there's any risk involved in the growth of the business. You're the business person. You have to make those decisions. And after you've gotten the advice from your CPA with respect to these other things that we gave you here, this is all important. And it's important to have your accountant for that. But you don't want to rely on them for business advice. So again, hopefully that's clear.